Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So in the previous video, I gave my top 3 reasons for still wearing barefoot shoes after 4 years. And since making that video, I have learned so much. Some of that's come from the comment section of that video, and other insights have come from me doing further research and reading on the subject. So in this video, I wanted to share with you the top 3 things I got wrong in that previous video, or that I wanted to kind of update on. By the way, if you're new here, my name's Josh. I'm an investment actuary turned YouTuber, and I currently work as an investment researcher, meaning that I love to just deep dive on topics related to investment, but also other topics that I'm interested in. So I hope you find this video useful. So in my previous video, I described my barefoot journey, which started with insights from Ross Edgley in his book Blueprint. I love this book, and he goes into quite a lot of detail about barefoot shoes and why they're useful, or just running barefoot. And that's kind of what got me into really interested in things. But then I read Born to Run, which was like the book that made barefoot running popular. Absolutely love this book. You don't have to be a runner to read it, but yeah, talks a lot about the different kind of barefoot communities that are out there, but focuses on the Tarahumara tribe who run barefoot and are just incredibly skilled at running marathons, and quite often beat people that aren't running barefoot in actual marathons. That book led me on Barefoot Runners Step by Step by Barefoot Ken Bob Saxton. And this book I got for like 50p secondhand on Amazon, I think. And in Born to Run, Barefoot Ken Bob is mentioned as kind of like the sage of barefoot running and the guy that kind of, started it in the Western world perhaps. And so I thought, what more could Ken Bob Saxton have to say? And I was absolutely shocked by his book. So the way to think about it is that this is kind of like an intro to barefoot running and kind of the story behind it, but then this is kind of like the manual. Barefoot Ken Bob has been running marathons for absolute years barefoot. He runs them very quickly as well. I was a bit reluctant buying this, but I've been absolutely shocked about the knowledge that I gained from it. So I'm going to share with you the key 3 things I got wrong. So the first thing I got wrong is I gradually transitioned to barefoot shoes from normal shoes. And this basically was driven by me just searching for more and more comfortable shoes as I kind of upped my walking distance and running distance. And I realized that wearing the shoes that I normally wore to walk in was actually really painful, and I was just kind of taking the pain. Why should it hurt? Can I get more comfortable shoes? And that led me to barefoot shoes. However, what Barefoot Ken Bob recommends is just going straight to barefoot. And I know some of you guys in the comments said that to me. Ken Bob basically says that by transitioning slowly like I did, that can actually increase your injury rate. And that's because any kind of barrier between the sole of your foot and the ground blocks valuable feedback that your body will use to change the way you're walking or running. The way he describes it is it's like playing the piano with gloves on. You can kind of do it, but you still block that valuable sensory feedback which your body uses. Now, Barefoot Ken Bob is the leader of this kind of barefoot movement, so to speak, well, at least in California. Yeah, he has the ability to be barefoot all the time. I don't really have the ability to be barefoot all the time. I have commitments, I have to go to work in an office. So I think actually using barefoot shoes are the most minimalist shoes I can find for those situations work well. I think there is actually a lot of time during the day when you can actually be barefoot. And so Barefoot Ken Bob recommends just going straight barefoot. And guess what? The best thing about that is it's free. You don't have to do expensive shoes, socks, or whatever. You can just take your shoes off and start walking around, and maybe even go outside. I have actually started walking around outside barefoot in London, or at least the parks. And yeah, my wife is just like, please wear shoes. So obviously embarrassing some people, but yeah, definitely feel the benefits. So in the book, he also has like a hierarchy of footwear that gives you the least injury. And at the top, you've got kind of barefoot. And he says like paper shoes, thin socks, thick socks. And then right at the bottom, you've got like army boots. I think cushion shoes are slightly above that. And then, yeah, Vibrams are actually only there, so relatively high. So yeah, super interesting insights. One of the key things I got wrong was that I wanted to transition slowly when I should have just gone straight barefoot. The second thing I got wrong in my previous video was that I said I was forced to walk on my toes. And I was quite embarrassed actually watching back that video, because there was a clip of someone walking in 5 fingers, and they were very clearly not walking on their toes. So I thought that was a massive contradiction, so I wanted to address this. So what I learned from this book and other books by Daniel Lieberman was that, interestingly, when you walk or run barefoot, you tend to land on the ball of your foot first. And that's kind of intuitive because it's probably the most robust part of the foot. And then either your toes come down or the heel comes down first. And it depends on the person, I think, and the different type. Apparently, Barefoot Ken Bob, when he went to Daniel Lieberman's lab, he found that essentially his toes landed last, which is quite interesting. So he landed ball of his foot, then heel, then toes. So almost the opposite of what I said in my previous video, although it was very subtle. So obviously you had to have this amazing camera, a really high frame rate to see that action in motion. I just wanted to address the fact that barefoot shoes don't actually force you to walk on your toes. It feels that way because your toes are way more engaged, particularly when you're trying to change direction or when you're walking downhill for stability. But still, most of the force is going onto the ball and then into the heel of the foot. And that kind of makes sense as well. Like, it links in with the arch comment I made previously, where the arch is the strong part of the foot. So you want that to be the load-bearing structure. So if you think about it, your ball comes first, then your heel, and that creates that arch of strength, and the toes are there for support. The toes and the muscles that control the toes are actually not that strong, so it kind of makes sense that that wouldn't be very efficient to run on your toes for a very long time. And there are lots of examples in the book where Ken Bob interviews people that have actually had quite a lot of injury from trying to run on their toes and not embracing the kind of flat footfall that he advocates. So barefoot, very few people heel strike. So a study of Kenyan runners by Daniel Lieberman found that only 19% of them land on their heels. However, that statistic is almost flipped when you add in shoes, and if you add in sort of padded shoes, 80% of people heel strike. So that shows how padded shoes might affect your running game. Another kind of key point linking to this is because you land, or you tend to land ball heel toes or ball toes heels, process of doing that means that you tend to naturally lower the impact. So it's almost like you create one big shock absorber with the ground. That's the key link that Daniel Lieberman makes between barefoot running and having lower injury rates. It's just by the very nature of running barefoot, you naturally limit or reduce your impact, he says, by up to 50%, and that causes, over the long term, lower injury rates. The analogy he uses, which I quite like, is you should think of your feet as an airplane coming into land. Obviously, you can have very bumpy landings where there's a big force when you land, but a good landing is where the airplane just comes to touchdown gently and you barely feel it because all the shock absorbers are working and the force is limited. And Daniel Lieberman says that if you land correctly, so you land gently in on the ball of your foot, you don't need any padding because the forces are so low, you don't need any protection from the impact. And the third thing I got wrong was I completely dismissed the idea of grounding. So I dismissed this as a fad and ignored my kind of ingrained sense that it actually just felt good. And why was I denying myself that? From doing further research, there seems to be actually some benefits to being completely barefoot. Interestingly, there's a study in this book of probably the one other mammal that uses shoes regularly and how that affects them. And so we obviously used to nail horseshoes to the bottom of horses' feet, and apparently that was primarily to keep them elevated above the ground that we used to kind of keep them on so that their feet didn't get rotted in the kind of detritus in the streets. But recently they found that if they took the horseshoes off horses and allowed them to be barefoot, obviously cleaned up the ground they were walking on, the horses were far more healthier. And that's due to things like circulation being improved. So it does seem that there's a huge number of benefits to being completely barefoot, and that sensation that it feels good is probably telling you something. And that's a key lesson I learned from Barefoot Ken Bob. His whole approach to barefoot shoes started because he started listening to his body and listening to feedback. And he's like, if it hurts, then that's your body telling you something isn't right. And so you should change things to fix it. So yeah, it goes back to my story about how I used to walk around in work shoes all the time. I was in a lot of pain. I eventually, made it through to my head, and I decided to try and change things, be more comfortable. And I went down the shoes route, but Barefoot Ken Bob was just like, just chuck away the shoes and go completely barefoot. So definitely listen to feedback. And if grounding feels good, then I should just embrace it. So a couple of other points I wanted to make on being completely barefoot. People often cite various studies, either side of the argument, saying that they're good, they're bad, whatever. But again, I think this reminds me of Nassim Talebism, which is lecturing birds how to fly. It's like, you don't often have to wait for the theory to catch up. You can often just focus on doing the thing that works and feels good. I think we can not wait for a study, and just if barefoot running works for you, just embrace it. Another interesting point I found about being completely barefoot is I was on holiday recently and I was reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, so the famous Stoic book. And I found it interesting that in that book, he talks about doctors advocating barefoot walking as well as cold plunging and bare horseback riding, I think. So very ancient remedy, or maybe they just knew it kind of felt good or improved health back in Roman times. And then the final point is, in this book, I didn't go into it, but he gives a complete manual on how to run barefoot safely. So obviously, if you just go out there and run a marathon barefoot, having never done it before, you're probably going to hurt yourself. So if you want to learn more about his advice on how to actually run barefoot, dig into his book. So there we have it. Those are my 3 things that I got wrong in my previous video. I hope you found them interesting. I'll be really interested in your comments and any questions you might have on the subject. So then that just leaves me with what would be my perhaps 5-step plan to transitioning to being barefoot runner/walker at this stage with all the knowledge I have now. So the first thing I would do is I would be barefoot at home whenever I could be. So definitely all summer long, just be barefoot, maybe go out in the garden barefoot if you have a garden. I think it's all really good stuff. And I think a lot of people wear, various shoes inside, or I think socks are probably okay, thin socks if you get cold. But yeah, I definitely recommend being barefoot inside all the time. The second thing I would do is explore walking barefoot outside. So I do this quite a lot, where obviously walk to the park wearing shoes and then take them off to walk around the park. That's something where you can kind of ease in and you don't look too different or crazy if you're walking around barefoot in the park in the summer. He actually advocates for training on harshest terrain you can find, because that obviously helps you keep your impact as low as possible. The third thing I would do is transition all my time where I have to wear shoes to be wearing as minimalist shoes as possible. I might even take off my shoes wherever possible. I've been doing this at work. I stopped caring to some extent about the footwear I was wearing, and I didn't get any comments at all actually. So yeah, I would have some minimalist shoes just for when I have to wear shoes. So there are always those occasions, I think, in the modern life. And then the fourth thing I would do would be to try off-road barefoot running. So maybe walking to the park, taking off my shoes, and then doing a few laps to the park barefoot, or just doing some barefoot trail running. And that would help overall foot stability and just getting used to the barefoot style and slightly softer ground. And then the fifth thing I would do is get used to running barefoot on concrete. And concrete obviously has the potential to create the biggest impact barefoot if you don't do it properly, and potentially create the biggest injury, but it's where most marathons obviously are run. So if you want to run barefoot marathons, that's probably the point you want to get to. I don't know if I'll ever get to that point, to be honest. I'm still enjoying kind of steps 1 through 4, but you never know, I might get there. So there we have it. That is the 3 things that I think I got wrong about barefoot shoes, plus my 5-step plan for transitioning to barefoot now. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and please let me know if I've missed anything else, or if you have anything else to show me. Thanks so much.